Hello guys, my name is Rowan Smith and I want to welcome you to the Training for Mountaineering podcast. Now this podcast is entirely dedicated to helping you train, prepare and conquer your upcoming mountaineering adventure. Once a week I'm going to be sharing with you in-depth and evidence-backed information around improving your physical performance on the mountain, reducing your likelihood of pain and injury, nutrition for mountaineers, and even a bit of mental strength development, so you can be empowered in your training to give yourself the very best chance of a safe, enjoyable, and successful mountaineering adventure. So now that you know what you're in for, let's get into today's episode. Alright, hello guys. Today we are talking all about how a mountaineer can stay fit for the mountains all year round. Now, this is a really common question I hear from mountaineers out there who are interested in their training, because the majority of the training information out there currently available to mountaineers is targeted at people who are aiming for 1 or potentially 2 big climbs a year, and that is it. So basically they take a very gradual approach which builds up consecutively over the months to peak at a certain date, basically just before your climb. And there is absolutely no doubt that this approach is effective. And if you are leading into a big climb, this is probably the recommended approach most mountaineers should be taking. But what about the other mountaineers who don't have a single objective in the year, who simply want to stay fit and strong for the mountains for an entire season of climbing or for the entire year, or who might not have a major adventure coming up over the next 12 months and want to stay motivated with their training and find taking that super slow gradual approach is just the most boring thing in the world? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, before we go any further, I want to be clear about this. It is impossible to maintain 100% peak fitness all year round. Being at your absolute best can only be sustained for a relatively short period of time. Eventually, motivation will wane, the body will begin to break down, or something else will happen which will get in the way of this. So maintaining your peak fitness is just not realistic. So this podcast isn't about reaching the pinnacle of your performance, but more about a system of training to maintain about 85-90% of your potential, which will be plenty for most adventures, and can be a really great base to launch off if you do decide you need to transition into a more sequential approach. Now, the outline of this episode turned into a little bit of a monster when I was first putting it together, so I basically broke it up into 2 separate parts. Today we're talking about how you can stay fit for mountaineering all year round, so we're mainly talking through your cardio and conditioning work, and in a future episode, maybe in a few weeks, we'll be talking about how you can stay strong for mountaineering all year round. So we'll be talking about your strength and your endurance training when you're in this situation. And finally, before we get into things, this definitely isn't the only way of going about this. There's so many different ways of going about your training and so many ways that do work, but I find this particular system does work and it's very simple. People can get their heads around it and it will suit about 95% of mountaineers in this situation. So with all that being said, let's get into it. Now, first things first, what we're going to be doing here with this particular system is we're going to be breaking up your training into 4-week blocks at a time. In each 4-week block, we're going to be aiming for 3 weeks of solid training and 1 week of deload, in which you'll reduce the volume and the intensity of your training to let everything recover. Now, this is a general principle we're going to follow throughout the rest of the episode, so just keep that in mind. 4-week blocks, 3 weeks of training, 1 week of deload. So, first of all, let's get into our aerobic capacity workouts and how we want to be scheduling them and dealing with those in this situation. So no matter what you are doing, you need to be working on your aerobic capacity. Now, if you haven't heard of aerobic capacity before, basically in a really simple terminology, it is the efficiency of your body to produce energy while using oxygen as a fuel source. A large aerobic capacity allows you to do prolonged periods of moderate work without getting so fatigued that you have to stop or slow down. And having a higher aerobic capacity allows you to go for longer periods at a faster pace. And this is the single most important aspect of fitness a mountaineer needs to develop. Now, this can be developed pretty much endlessly with no real limit. So whether you've been training for 12 weeks or 12 years, you can continually grow this. And this is one of the reasons why older endurance athletes who have a big training history behind them often have a big advantage because they've simply been building this aerobic capacity over years and years and even decades, and it is really, really pretty much endless, in all honesty. And no matter where you are in your year, in your season of your training, or your period of training, you really need to be working on this, and there's no question and no avoiding this. So how do you go about it? Well, it is really simple, and most listening will probably be aware of this. It's basically with large amounts of lower intensity, long duration exercise. So this is running, cycling, hiking, all those standard approaches. Traditionally, when you're gearing up to a big adventure, you just basically continuously build this throughout your preparations. And every week you just do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, continuously build this up until you get to the end point where you're doing your sort of full potential before you go on a trip, and that's where you want to be. But obviously this isn't going to be so relevant for this situation where we're talking about, where you want to maintain fitness all year round. And this approach does have quite a few drawbacks in that situation. You obviously just cannot keep on improving. You'll get bored, you'll start to break down, there'll come periods of plateaus. And if you really, really know what you're doing with your training, you can work around this. But if you want to keep things simple, I'm going to tell you a much easier approach. So what we're going to do in this particular system is you're just going to sit down and you're going to list out a big range of different lower intensity cardio options which you have access to and then you're happy to do. So this really could be anything, but some common examples are hiking, road running, trail running, road cycling, mountain biking, skiing, gym cardio options, so things like the stepper, the treadmill, the Jacob's ladder, maybe doing some light sled work of pushing and pulling, and maybe doing the rower, the cross trainer, really whatever suits you. Anything that you can really sustain for high periods of time without getting outrageously fatigued. So if you can do it for 30 minutes or more pretty comfortably, and you don't get absolutely bored, then this is probably going to go into your list. And you want to sit down and just write as many of these out as you can. Now, what you're going to be doing in each phase of your programming, you're going to be choosing one of these particular types of cardio to complete as a long session each week. So what you're going to do, you're going to choose one day a week where you can dedicate a few hours of time or multiple hours of time to a session, and you're basically going to choose one day where you repeat this same workout each week, each phase. So what you're going to do is you're going to start off with a distance or time which you can pretty much happily commit to each week. So it doesn't have to be these outrageous times where you know that's going to take over your life, but something you're happy to commit to and something which isn't at the very, very limit of your abilities. And then each week, you're going to add between 5 to 10% of your total time on top of what you're doing. So for example, if you were doing an hour run one week, you'd add 10% on that, which would work out to be, 70-minute run. That might be stretching a little bit, but that's a sort of example we're looking at. You basically want to each week add 5 to 10% of your total time, building up. Now, generally, I'd recommend doing this, each type of activity, for blocks of about 8 weeks at a time, and then switching it up. So you might choose you're going to do trail running, and you do 8 weeks of trail running, build, and then at the end of the 8 weeks, you'd go, okay, I'm going to do something different now. I'm going to do 8 weeks of road cycling, or however you want to do that. Now, if you do feel like you need more variety in this and you do get bored continually doing stuff, then you might break it down to 4-week blocks. Or if you feel like you need a bit more consistency, you might do it in 12-week blocks. There are your options there. As I said earlier, over each 4 weeks, you want to be factoring in 3 weeks of building and 3 weeks of working hard, and then 1 week of deload, meaning a decent drop in volume. So to give you a bit of an example of this and how it might look over an 8-week period, here's a really, really overly simplified version. Is in the first week, you might do a 2-hour run. Second week, you'd add 10 minutes to that, do a 2-hour and 10-minute run. Third week, you do a 2-hour and 20-minute run. Then the fourth week, that's your deload week, so you might drop it down to an hour and a half run. And then you're on the fifth week, that's another training week, so now we go up again, 2.5 hours. Next week, 2 hours, 40 minutes. Next week, 2 hours, 50 minutes. And then the 8th week, that's another deload week. You might do a 2-hour run. And then you swap that over to mountain biking for 8 weeks or something like that. Now that's, obviously very overly simplified, but you sort of get the idea. It's just that gradual increase, drop back for a deload week, increase. Now, this training does need to be low intensity, meaning it isn't a time trial, it isn't a race. This is wanting to be working on aerobic capacity. So all of these workouts should be done at a pace where you can either breathe through your nose or you can maintain a conversation throughout. Now, these are some really, really easy measures to ensure you're working in the right energy system. If you're super huffing and puffing throughout this entire time, you're not working the right intensities, meaning it's not going to be getting the desired effects, and you need to reduce your intensity. Now, another judge of this is you can literally look at 75% of your maximum heart rate. That's definitely not 100% accurate, but it's close enough for many people. And if you can work below 75% of your max heart rate, or as close to 75% of your max heart rate, you're probably working at the right intensity. Now, if you do want to do some more tests to get a better measure of this, there are a bunch of things out there. And if you have done these tests to accurately determine your training zones, then you want to be working below your aerobic threshold. That's entirely in your ballpark, but I know for most mountaineers, either you love it or you don't. And if you don't love that type of technical stuff, you can go off either the nose breathing or the below 75%. Now, some people will look at that process and they will be not like the idea of having a deload week every 4 weeks. And I understand that this idea can be quite foreign to many mountaineers out there who just want to train hard all the time and they just want to keep on growing and growing and growing. And they might not feel like they need a rest period every 4 weeks. That might be a bit of overkill. And I completely acknowledge that this blanket recommendation might not be 100% relevant for everyone. And as a general rule of thumb, if you are training long term, this is just a really good strategy to stick to. Basically, what it does is it makes you take a rest before you really need it, meaning it can sort of preempt that fatigue, that overly stressed out stage. It can give you periods each month just to clear your head and remotivate yourself, and also give you a bit of flexibility. So if you do go away on holidays, if you have a busy week at work, if you get sick or whatever, you can use that deload week when necessary. So you can move it around in the week to suit. Now, as I said, I know some people will not be so keen on that, but I do find it can be pretty effective for 95% of people out there. Now, that's your one long session a week. Now, that's probably not going to be enough aerobic capacity work for you in a week. Now, it's just, ideally it would be, but it's not. And we do need to do a little bit more. Generally, what I recommend here is just fitting in another shorter, lower intensity session through the week. So this is a little bit lower intensity as well, a little bit easier, but it's sort of same thing, running, cycling, something like that. The idea behind this is it can help aid your recovery, but day to day. It can help manage your weekly training load, meaning when you do come up to your long run or your long cycle every week, your body isn't super surprised by this long distance and it's sort of used to doing a bit of work through the week. And it can help aid just the development of the aerobic capacity. Doing those shorter sessions will add up. So here what I'd recommend is probably choosing a lower impact option. So something like cycling, hiking, swimming, gym cardio or something like that. Purely for the fact that some people, if they're just doing running all the time, many mountaineers tend to be carrying foot issues, knee issues, all of this long term. And I like these shorter cardio ones to be a little bit more nicer on the joints. If you are an experienced runner and you don't have any issues, then yeah, maybe go for a long, gentle run. Or if you're looking at doing more climbing, it might be like a really low technical, easy climbing day where you're just focusing on volume and not difficulty, whatever you want. But basically these sessions can go anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes, depending on what suits you. And you sort of cycle between these at the same rate as your other aerobic sessions. So every 8 weeks, every 4 weeks, or every 12 weeks, depending on whatever you want. Now, during your deload weeks, you don't have to modify this session completely, so you can just keep on doing this continually. And that's pretty much straightforward. So far, we've got one longer session of aerobic capacity and one shorter session of aerobic capacity each week, which you can do more or less non-stop. So next up, we want to talk a little bit about higher intensity cardio sessions. Now, higher intensity cardio is important for a mountaineer. Now, low intensity does get a lot of push and a lot of information, a lot of love behind it for mountaineers for good reasons, because it's essential, but higher intensity stuff is important as well. Now, when I'm saying this, I don't mean doing generic HIIT sessions in your local gym or doing Crossfit or F45. Basically anything that's written up on a whiteboard or coming up on a computer screen, or anything that people are doing for weight loss or general fitness next to you is not going to be appropriate for you. What I mean when I say higher intensity cardio is stuff which is specific for your mountaineering goals. So you can't be pretending you're doing the same workout as some random guy at the gym and say it's going to be improving your mountaineering. Now, traditionally, in the normal preparation, you'd hold this off until, 2/3, 3/4 through your preparation, where you'd start to slowly incorporate more and more high intensity after you built that aerobic base. But obviously, if we're trying to maintain fitness all year, or if you're in season or whatever, you just don't have this luxury. And it can obviously just be quite dull doing aerobic capacity work only. And I completely understand that. And as much as a perfect training world, we might be able to spend 12 months working on aerobic capacity. It can be the most boring thing in the world. So incorporating higher intensity cardio in this situation is pretty important. So one way of going about this, if you want to keep things super simple, is basically just list out a huge number of different higher intensity workouts for mountaineers. And basically you're going to repeat one of these workouts every week for 4 weeks, and then you rotate through them. So you can literally just troll through the internet, troll through any online sources, any books or anything, and just pull out these higher intensity workouts which might be worthwhile for a mountaineer. This might be tempo runs, it might be aerobic power intervals, it might be 30-30s, it might be hill runs, it might be fartlek, it might be any of this stuff. Like there's literally thousands and thousands of different workouts out, and you can just basically put a big list of these together and just choose one to do every 4 weeks. This will work if you want to keep things simple and you don't want to think, you don't really care about the technical side, and you just rotate between them. It'll be good, it'll probably give you what you need, and go with this, and it should give you no dramas. However, if you did want to get a little bit more targeted and put a little bit more thought behind this and really get the most benefits out of this type of stuff, you can ask yourself, which aspect of fitness do I want to develop in this training block? So in these 4 weeks, what aspect of fitness do I want to develop? Do you want to work on aerobic power? Do you want to work on lactate capacity? Do you need some specific technical work done for your mountaineering trip, or some skills that you're trying to learn or practice? Do you need more aerobic capacity and you realize that needs a bit more? Do you want more muscular endurance? Do you want to fit in extra climbing time? Like what specifically do you want to work in these 4 weeks to improve, to get yourself better for either your training or your mountaineering? And then basically you can just choose a specific workout for this particular aspect of fitness for each block, repeat this once a week to improve on this particular thing. So this doesn't have to be predetermined, but you can make up your mind every 4 weeks or every 8 weeks or whatever and say, look, I feel like I need a little bit more ability to deal with higher intensity lactate building up and that really nasty feeling. I'm going to do some lactate capacity intervals. Or I feel like I'm falling behind on my climbing. I'm going to do extra climbing in this period and just rotate through that. With this approach, you do need a little bit more technical know-how, so you do need to understand what workouts target what aspects of fitness. But if you do understand that, then this can be a really good approach. Now, with this approach, depending on which way you go, it doesn't really matter, but with your deload weeks, you would either drop the volume or the intensity of work here, just depending on your preference. So for example, if you're doing aerobic power intervals on the bike, you could either reduce the number of reps that you complete in your deload week or drop the target speed each interval in your deload week, just to make sure you're feeling all right. Now, the only other thing to note on this is if you do want to monitor how you are feeling throughout. So if you're going through periods of fatigue, bad sleep, poor nutrition, high stress, or whatever, you might want to consider swapping out this higher intensity workout for another lower intensity one. So another gentle cycle, another swim, another gentle run. Use your best judgment here. Now, some people might argue that doing higher intensity training continuously is too much for a mountaineer. But if you're consistently ticking off those 2 aerobic capacities workouts each week and you're monitoring how you are feeling, you will be fine. So now, listing off the workouts, we have one longer aerobic capacity, one shorter aerobic capacity, one higher intensity conditioning. Now, you might be asking yourself, that doesn't seem like a huge amount, and you might be used to be doing multiple methods and days of building your aerobic base and building your aerobic work in the week. And if that is true, then you might fit in another aerobic session or another 2 aerobic sessions in the week. That's perfectly fine if that's what you're used to. But for me, 95% of mountaineers, I'm going to say, going to get away with those 3 workouts a week. Not all of us want our training to take over our lives. Some of us do, but it's completely up to you. But that's a really good basis you can work off. Now, you might be asking yourself the question, where's my actual mountaineering fitting in? So if I am in season or if I have multiple mountain objectives coming up, how does that play in? Well, it can fit into this system quite nicely. There's a couple of rules you just want to be aware of. Basically, any week you do a climb or a trip, this is going to substitute out for your longer aerobic capacity workout that week. You're already moving for long periods of time. That's pretty much common sense. If you're doing a strenuous adventure, meaning something that's going to, tax you reasonably well, you're going to basically do a deload in the week before and the week after the trip. And then the 2 remaining weeks in that 4-week block, they're just going to be normal training. And that way you get go into your adventure feeling fully recharged, fully fresh, and you also get a bit of time afterwards to recover properly. However, if you're doing a less strenuous adventure, so something that is, it's a bit of a challenge, but it's not really going to tax you a huge amount, you might just have skip the deload weeks and you might just take a couple of days either side just to go and chill out and let yourself recover, and then take that as your rest. And then probably with your training in those weeks, just don't progress it. Don't increase the time, don't increase the intensity, don't increase the speed, just maintain things. But that's really what you want to use your best judgment, just see how your body's feeling and how you go. And then if you're in a period of where you're just climbing, venturing mountains all the time, and basically you probably want to drop the higher intensity session and just do what you can to maintain aerobic capacity and then maintain strength, which we'll talk about later. And that is difficult when you're just constantly on the go, but you just got to do what you can there. So there you go. Bit of technical stuff today and a little bit of thinking behind that. But in all honesty, that's a pretty simple system a mountaineer can use to stay fit all year round. Are there better ways of going about this? Probably. But this system is dead simple. You really don't need a huge amount of training knowledge to apply it. It's pretty flexible, and most importantly, it is effective. So 95% of mountaineers in this situation, if you're not interested in learning about technical workouts or different periodization schemes and all of that, you can apply this system and it'll probably work for you. If you are in this situation, I highly recommend giving it a crack, and I think it'll work well for you. Now, as I said, in a few weeks, I'll be releasing part 2 of this podcast, where we will explore how to incorporate strength and endurance training into this system. But as I said, it turned into a monster episode, so we're not going to be touching on that now. So that's enough from me today, guys. I very much hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Got a little bit deeper into things today, but hopefully you're still with me and you're still paying attention. If you have enjoyed this podcast, you feel like you've gotten some great information out of it, feel like it's a bit of value for you, it really would mean the world to me if you could take 5 minutes to leave a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. It really does go a huge way to help me grow this podcast, reach more mountaineers, and share this training knowledge with more people. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye.